Hello everybody, my name is Alex Merced from alexmerced.com, and what I want to talk about today is where does a better social order come from? Because lately there's been a debate, and I mean very much in the public consciousness, there's been a debate between multiculturalism and nationalism, essentially where it's sort of a more belief that the culture should be more homogeneous within basically a community in a sense, where basically people who are multiculturalists believe that it's okay to have lots of different types of people with lots of different beliefs and values and cultures, and it's desirable. While a nationalist believes that a group of people, a community, especially within sort of a physical land mass, should have shared values, fairly uniform values, traditions, etc. Because if you start introducing too many people with too many different ways of thinking, it'll distort sort of that core set of values, traditions, etc. So more of a, we need to protect this sort of set of ideas. Now, how you do that protection depends who you're talking to. You might have some more interventionist nationalists who do believe government should be used to do such. You may have some more libertarian nationalists who just believe that it should just be done by, getting everyone's private property together and agreeing that to only let people they agree with on their private property. But the idea is that they believe in sort of a more cultural, homogeneous social order, while the multiculturalists believe that that's not necessary. Okay, and I think the reason, that the core of why there's this difference, it depends on how you think a better social order comes into existence. Okay, is it something that evolves? Or is it something that must be created, designed, protected? Okay, and depending on where you sit on that will determine where you kind of are in these two positions. So for example, I've always taken a more evolutionary approach to things. Okay, so while I appreciate a lot of sort of the state, anti-state sentiments of like a Rothbard, and I agree with a lot of what he says about the possibility of a stateless society, etc., and how things can be done without a state, I personally take a more evolutionary approach a la Hayek, where basically institutions evolve and whatnot. So I generally lie somewhere in the middle between sort of Rothbard and Hayek and sort of the way the world works and how the world gets to where it's going. And this is sort of why I appreciate markets and why I'm so pro-free markets, free association, freedom in every aspect of our lives. Because I believe it's that interaction, the ability to make mistakes in the market, not just to be able to start a successful business, but to be able to start a failing business that allows us as a society to learn, not just to learn how to produce goods and services better, but how to interact with each other, how to communicate with each other. All of that is learned through trial and error. And that trial and error can only occur if we're free to do that trial and error. So that's why I want people to be as free as possible, not free to just thrive, but free to make mistakes. And that's why I like multiculturalism, not just because I think everyone's just going to get along, because I think a lot of people are not going to get along. And I think there's a lot of benefits to that. Because when we do interact with each other, whether we like each other or don't like each other, we have to find new ways to make it work. Okay? And that teaches us new things, which those things can come from different setups or changes in each individual culture. Okay, if you take a look at most multicultural societies and cultural communities that have been there for a few generations, in that multicultural society, not people who just moved there, but people who've been there for a few generations, oftentimes their culture has, in a sense, softened. Okay, so being around other people helps soften and broaden your views and helps you identify what are the great parts of your culture and what are the parts that may be holding you back, and change and evolve and innovate. Okay, so this is why I feel when I look around the world, the places that are sort of the most multicultural, and not just because a bunch of people flooded in, but because you've had several different communities there for several generations having to learn to work together through trial and error, not always looking pretty, there's been hostilities, tensions, etc. But it's those tensions that allowed the future generations to learn to work better, respect each other. Also on top of it, I think there's less government abuse that way. Because when you do have a cultural a culturally homogenous society, what's going to happen is that people are going to buy into the idea that government's acting on their behalf more, because everybody else that government is acting on behalf is, for the most part, very similar to them. So they're more willing to accept a welfare state, more willing to accept oppression of civil liberties, because they feel it's them doing it. While when you have a multicultural society, well, the people that government represents, theoretically, not just me, but all these other people who I don't feel are similar to me, and they're trying to use force upon me. So you're gonna be much more skeptical of government, because you don't as much feel government as your avatar, because you're in a multicultural society, and that government now is representing multiple parties instead of just you, in a sense. So then what happens is that while you still have government abuse, that's just the nature of government, where people are going to use that power to benefit themselves. You end up having sort of more of a stalemate, where basically not only there's people of every community trying to find ways to use the government to their benefit, but everyone's also trying to prevent everybody else from using the government to their benefit. So it creates that checks and balances. So I like multiculturalism, not because I think everyone's going to get along. Well, we'll learn to over time, but I think that the fact that people won't get along also holds everybody else in check. It becomes a check and balance. That's why I like diversity. I like multiculturalism. I like freedom within that as well. Okay, because it's those mistakes and errors that'll evolve to a better social order. Okay, so again, the idea is that we're not going to just get the right people together and then social order is just going to exist. It's going to happen because of trial and error. So that's the evolutionary approach that I think will get to a better place, not because we all just suddenly agreed on the same thing, or we all suddenly became enlightened libertarians, but because through trial and error, we just are naturally going to kind of get there, because what's going to work is going to naturally sort of be that more libertarian world. While the more designed nationalist approach basically believes that for a better, more liberty-friendly social order to exist, you need to have a whole society that believes in libertarian values, and you can't have a flood of people who have other ideas regarding the use of force and power and whatnot, because they will dismantle that society you created. Thus, the idea of sort of protecting that physically. That's theoretically difficult, because there really isn't that much land space. Now, of course, things like seasteading introduce the idea of trying out things like this, but the problem is, when I take a look at places where you do have more homogeneous cultures, again, you do see more oppressive governments, because people are more okay with government doing things because they feel more like the government's acting on their behalf. And sometimes it doesn't look oppressive. But I mean, large welfare states that need large tax burdens can be just as oppressive as huge surveillance states and police states. Okay, but you see these most in places with very sort of culturally uniform populations. Now, on top of that, the thing is that also that trial and error doesn't happen as much, because you're not learning from trial and error and evolving from interacting with others. So that's also some of my issues. Now, the counterpoint is, yes, you may interact with others through exchange. You may interact with others. They're just talking about having a sort of physical place where they physically exist together and respect each other's rights and protect each other's rights. But at the end of the day, I think coexisting with people, having someone that's very different from you as your neighbor or whatnot, has a lot of an evolutionary educational capacity. You can't design something. A lot of people want to create this perfect policy, perfect government, perfect anarchy, perfect anything. You can't design it. We can think of ways it might work, but at the end of the day, what actually works is always going to be based on the sort of the values and preferences of people at the time, and you can't just design people's preferences and values. I can tell you ideas, my logical thinking on things, and that may influence your values and preferences marginally, or maybe to a great extent, but I'll never be able to just make them what I want them. So in that case, you can't just design a world where these institutions are magically going to work, because people have to have buy-in into the institutions they interact with. Not just government, but every institution you interact with. A family doesn't work if people don't buy into the idea that this is their family. Religion doesn't work if people doesn't buy in to that religion. There has to be buy-in into every institution. And buy-in can't necessarily be, you can manufacture it to an extent, but to the extent to create a libertarian nation that you then have to go and protect from intruders, to me sounds... I mean, again, you can believe that. I just don't think that's the way the world works. I think that libertarian social order is just going to be a natural evolution of the interactions between people, and that's why it's important to keep the market as free as possible and protect our freedoms as much as possible, so that way that trial and error in society can evolve quicker, so we can get to that better order quicker. And that requires having as many people around as possible, so that way different cultures can evolve and innovate, and making and pushing for more multiculturalism in more places, so that way that evolution can occur and all cultures can sort of learn from another, learn what works, what doesn't work. So my name is Alex Merced from alexmerced.com. Have a great day and enjoy.